Hi, my name is Melissa Taboda. I'm a reporter with the Austin American-Statesman. I've been with the Statesman for about 14 years, and I've covered public education for 9 of those years. There's several things that you can cover with education. There's no shortage of stories for that. You can focus on curriculum and how that changes throughout the year or when new textbooks come out. Finances and taxes are a big issue that people care about because they have to put in money from their property taxes to pay for schools to keep running. That's the biggest part of how schools are funded. And people tend to get a little bristly over that. And so that's always a topic that's worth covering. Their budgets, what they're paying for, how much programs cost, how much teachers are getting paid. Texas higher education facts. There are no shortage of education or higher education institutions in Texas. There are 50 public community colleges, 2 independent junior colleges, but there are 38 public 4-year universities. The K through 12 structure is pretty interesting in Texas. You have the State Board of Education, and then the Texas Education Agency, which is a very, very good source to rely on. They keep all the statistics, including demographics and how much teachers are paid for every school district in Texas. Education Service Centers, there's about 20 of them in Texas, and they are kind of the go-between between the TEA, the Texas Education Agency, and school districts, and they can offer resources and training to the local school districts. In Texas, there are about 1,100 local school districts, and so many of them are very small, and typically reporters focus on the larger ones. School boards are elected positions. The trustees oversee or are the bosses for superintendents, and so while the superintendent does manage the day-to-day operations of a school district, ultimately they do have to report to the school boards who make final decisions on whether programs stay or go in a school district, and even whether or not somebody should be fired. State Board of Education, there are 15 members elected from the different districts across Texas, and they adopt rules and policies. Sometimes their decisions when it comes to textbooks or just kind of the input that they want to see in education butts up against local jurisdictions or the local school districts, and sometimes the local school districts feel a little bit inhibited by some of those policies and rules. The Texas Education Agency does administer public education. Their rules or policies are established by the legislature and the State Board of Education and the Commissioner of Education, and they are managed by that Commissioner of Education in Texas. They have about 1,000 employees. They are managed by the Commissioner of Education, and they can provide details on, curriculum and technical assistance and accredited programs. They have multiple programs where teachers can get an alternative accreditation for Texas, and so they can very much be a good support and resource for reporters. Education Service Centers, there are 20 in centers throughout Texas, and they do function as a go-between between the TEA and the school districts, and they do provide professional development for educators. They also have their own alternative accreditation process and training that teachers can take advantage of, and so they tend to be a good resource for reporters as well if there's some kind of alternative program. One of the things that they have been in charge of recently is having robots for the classroom, and so if a student is ill or out for a long time, they can install a robot that actually moves throughout the classroom for a student to see, be the eyes and ears of a student, and a student to participate that way so that they don't have to miss long-term out of school. Local school districts, like I said, there are nearly 1,100 public school districts in Texas and about 200 charter schools in Texas. Charter schools are public schools, but traditional public school districts, there tends to be a little bit of animosity between charter schools and traditional public schools because sometimes school districts feel like charters are taking away their students. They're all governed by some kind of board. The public school districts in particular are governed by elected school board trustees, and they are subject to state law. They do get their money primarily from property taxes, but they also get money from the state and the federal government. And school boards make policy, they collect taxes, they hire the superintendent, and sometimes the dynamic between the school board and the superintendent can be a little bit strained if they don't see eye to eye on the kind of programs or the kind of policies that the superintendent wants in place. So how to cover education. There is no quick or easy way to do it, but it's pretty methodical. You know, you can either start it from an idea, you can have one of your sources, whether that be a teacher or a student, or somebody calls in and just gives you a tip, your parents. A lot of stories also come from school board agendas, reading the agendas. What kind of things are they voting on? Are they looking at budgets? Are they looking at raises? Things like that. People are very interested in what happens at the school board level, but they're not interested in attending those kind of meetings. So for a reporter to go and provide those kind of details is really important because it's the source to the public on that kind of information and important decisions that they're making. It's a good idea to review what has already been written on different topics and then take it from there. Do update stories. How do you update this story? How do you, what's going on with that program now? If enrollment had shrunk one year, is it up or down the following year? Things like that. Identifying sources and interviewing them, that's everybody from the school board trustees, which, I like to try to meet with coffee occasionally, or parents, if you go to any kind of PTA meetings, or teachers, if you can just know some of the folks that are in the school districts because they're the ones who really are the eyes and ears on campuses, and a lot of stories could be generated from there. It's important to define your focus. Try not to make stories that are too big and so then you become overwhelmed. Really get in touch with the stakeholders. And by the way, I don't really like that word. Stakeholders is something that you try to avoid anytime you're writing a story. You just name specifically who those stakeholders are, like teachers and parents and students and principals, things like that. And then establish the context of the story, what exactly you want the point to be or what your focus is on, and then of course do your writing. So sources and stakeholders. Again, stakeholders is a word that you want to avoid, but in public ed, when you're more on the state level, it's the State Board of Education and those members there, the TEA, which would include the Commissioner of Education, the public information officers for TEA, the superintendents, the administrators, and those could be assistant superintendents of curriculum or directors of a specific department, school counselors, coaches, who, by the way, tend to be very chatty. They don't usually use the public information officers. Teachers, who tend to be quite skittish when it comes to talking to the media. Staff, bus drivers, parents, students, even cafeteria workers. The more involved you can be on ground level, the better, especially if you can talk to them in person. Tends to disarm those different sources. In the community, you have, the people who are paying the taxes, business owners, chambers of commerce, and Some chambers can be very active. They have their own education departments for that, and tapping into them, they tend to follow different trends, dropout rates, so they're a very good source. And then the different advocacy and specialty groups. You always have to question what each person's desire or role is in a story, what they're trying to accomplish, and that helps you understand what kind of source that they can be for you. And then at the higher education level, the coordinating board, system officials, administrators, campus administrators, things like that. So rules for meeting notices. Some school districts and some public agencies do try to skirt this a little bit, so it's really good to keep on top of this. And I have known some school districts in the Austin area that had to cancel their meetings because they did not post notices by the 72 hours that they're supposed to before a scheduled meeting. So that's something to stay on top of. School districts with a population more than 48,000 must also post the agenda on its website, and so it's available for people who don't have the means or the desire to go down to their headquarters and check it out there. The agenda notices have to list the subjects for the open meeting and closed executive session. And so it's always good to look at the executive session and see kind of the content of what they're talking about. It won't give specific details, but it may say something about the different parties who are in there and whether or not that pertains to a lawsuit or some kind of grievance. And then for all of those things, whatever they discuss behind closed doors, they have to, by law, come out and vote on it in public and not behind those closed doors. And then actions taken in violation of the notice requirements can be voided. And so if that ever comes up, it's always worth writing about and calling them out on it. So in case of monkey business, it's best to just tell the official, cite the Open Meetings Act, and ask them for the specific exemption that's allowing them to meet behind closed doors. You can tell them that you object to the effort to close the meeting to the public and to the news media, and that you can always confer with your editor, your superiors, or even your paper's attorney. And if for some reason you believe that meeting should be open, you should immediately call your boss and let them know that access is denied, and let people know that what's going on, that the violation happened. And a lot of times those meetings again can be voided, or that they will eventually allow you access to that.